Okay, today I want to introduce you to an idea that's sort of hidden behind the drapes in the story of the flood. But I want to introduce two thoughts, general thoughts for you too first, which are useful in general and be helpful for us as well. There's a big difference when you're exploring something, the big difference between proving that something's true and, on the other hand, explaining why it's true. They're not the same. And I'll give you an example. We're coming to winter now, and here's an experiment you can try. Take a door that's open to the outdoors. Open it just a crack. And take a lighted candle. And hold the candle at the top of the crack, and you'll see that the flame points outwards. Pull it down to the bottom of the crack, and you'll see that the flame points inwards. Why is that? Well, what's happening at the crack of the door? The warm air from inside is coming in contact with the cold air from outside. And when that happens, the warm air rises and the cold air sinks. So the warm air inside goes out on the top. That's why the flame points out. And the cold air outside comes in on the bottom. That's why the flame points in. So there you have a proof that when cold air and hot air come in contact with one another, the hot air goes up and the cold air goes down. That's a proof that that's what happens. Why does that happen? When you do the trick with the flame of the candle, you don't know why it happens. Maybe some of you don't even know now why it happens. A great deal of science is dedicated to explaining things that we know are true, but don't know why they happen that way. So what I'm going to do now is give you evidence in the text that a certain thing is very important. After that, we'll talk about why it's important, what its importance is, and how it should be used. But first of all, I'm going to show you something that is important, and it's clear in the text. If you pay attention, this is the second point, to tiny details. This text talks about great themes and morality and history and spirituality and God's relationship to the world, but there are lessons also in the tiny details. So on page 33, at the top of the page, verse 18, this is Hashem telling Noach how he and the selected few are going to avoid the flood. I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall enter the ark. You, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. Now, I suggest to you that that list, from a contemporary point of view, is very surprising. I suggest to you that you would never write a list like this. The New York Times certainly wouldn't write a list like this. Let's try it again. You, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives. What would we have written? Well, if we're going to list all four, how would we have listed them?
You, your sons and their wives, and your wife. You, your wives, your sons, and your sons' wives.
You and your wife, and your sons and your sons' wives. Wouldn't you have put husband and wife together? Yeah. This is very strange. Sounds like women to the back of the bus, huh? I mean, men first, and we can finish the men, then the women. Okay, but it's very strange. Now look at the bottom of the page, and you'll see that it said again, verse 7, Noach, with his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives with him, went into the ark. So again, it's the men first, and the women second. Now, take a look on page 39, and now things will get complicated. Page 39, God is telling Noach to exit the ark. Let's start with verse 15. God spoke to Noach, saying, go forth from the ark, you and your wife. and your sons' wives. Now we feel happy. There it is. That's how we would have written it. Husband and wives together. Of course, we'll have to explain why, when they went into the ark, they went in, according to the description, men and women separate. And here, they're being described as getting back together. Now, that's not so terribly difficult to explain, and the tradition, in fact, explains it. While they're on the ark, the whole world is drowning and dying. And God is telling them, this is no time for you to engage in procreation when it's a time of destruction. So I want you to be separate in the ark. And they carried that out. Now they're coming out of the ark. It's time to reproduce and fill the world. And indeed, if we keep reading, again, 15, God says to Noah, say, you, go forth in the ark, you and your wife, your sons and your sons' wives with you, every living being that is with you of all flesh, birds, animals, and moving things that move on the earth, order them out with you, and let them teem on the earth, and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. So that's the plan. Now that you're going out of the ark, get back together. That much, I think, is very clear on the surface. The next verse now then becomes a big difficulty, because the next verse says, 18, so Noah went forth and his sons, his wife and his sons' wives. Which means that when they exited the ark, they didn't do what they were told. They were told to go out together so as to repopulate the earth, and instead of that, they went out separately. This observation, which you could only make if you pay careful attention to details, this observation now drives the next 30 lines of text, and I'll show you how. So Noah built an altar, 20, and he offered offerings to Hashem. Hashem smelled the pleasing aroma, whatever that means. Hashem said in his heart, me now are getting, so to speak, a meditation of the Creator, private meditation. This is what he said to himself. He didn't publicize this. And what he said to himself is, no more floods. I will not continue to curse again the ground because of man, since the imagery of man's heart is evil from his youth, nor will I smite every living thing. Continuously, all days of the earth, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. No more general destruction. I don't mean that it's meditation like they have in the East, and you have to say Om, and you have to think about the hand of one hand clapping and everything else. I'm using that just to mean this is something that describes Hashem's ideas, but it's not communicated to anybody else. And you'll see because shortly it will be communicated. But in the meantime, it isn't communicated. So here's the setup. They're leaving the ark. They're supposed to get together and repopulate the earth. Hashem decides no more floods, no more general destructions. Those are not the same thing. But he doesn't tell anybody. And they come out separate. Okay, chapter 9. God blessed Noah and his sons. He said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the land. Golly, I gave you a hint. I told you to come out, you and your wife, your son's wife. I told you that. But you didn't get the hint. So now I'm going to make it clearer. First of all, I'm going to give you a blessing. This is good for you. And it's good for the world. Be fruitful and multiply. Skip down to verse 7, because the intermeaning we don't need for our point. And you be fruitful and multiply. So the commentators point out the first was a blessing, and now it's an order. Be fruitful and multiply on the earth. Team on the earth and multiply on it. Now I'm telling you, and I'll prove this at the end, they got a blessing and they got an order, and they still don't do it. They're still not willing to do it. So that's stage 1. Stage 2, Hashem, so to speak, tries again. And I know it's a stage 2 because verse 8 says, and God said, and verse 1 said, God said. So it's a separate speech. So God says, I'm blessing you to be fruitful and multiply. I'm ordering you to be fruitful and multiply. Let's see what will happen. He comes back next Thursday, nothing's happening. So then God says, at stage 2, as for me, behold, I establish my covenant with you, your offspring after you, every living being with you, birds, animals, beasts of the land, all the part of the ark, every beast. I will confirm my covenant with you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood. Never again shall be a flood to destroy the earth. No more general destructions. What on the previous page was Hashem's own private decision, now he tells them. The reason he tells them that is because what's holding them back from repopulating the earth is a very simple reflection. Hashem made Adam and Chava himself, the production of his creative activity. They gave rise to a population which failed and had to be destroyed. Now they said, you're telling us to repopulate the earth? Why? What for? Do we have any reason to believe that our descendants will be superior to the descendants of Adam and Chava? It's hopeless. We saw once that it failed. We're not willing to invest in another project, which again will come to failure. So stage 2, Hashem says, I know that's what's holding you back. I know that's why you're reluctant. I'll take care of that for you. I promise you, no more floods and no more general destruction. But they still don't do it. And I'll prove that to you at the end. They still don't do it. So now we come to stage 3, and again, a new speech, a new divine speech in 12. This is the sign of the covenant that I give between me and you, every living being that is with you, generations forever. I told you there's a covenant. I told you there's not going to be general destruction. I'm now creating a sign of my commitment, and that sign is the rainbow. That shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. And then he goes on to give a description of how the rainbow is going to work. So stage 3 is, I'm creating a sign of the covenant, this spectacular vision in the sky. In this stage, stage 3, he tells them about it. He tells them that that's what he's doing. Then there's stage 4. Stage 4 is 17, a new speech, and God said, this is the sign of the covenant. And the commentators say that here he showed it to him. He showed them an actual rainbow in the sky. In the previous verses, he just described that there will be such a sign, but he didn't show it to them. And here in stage 4, he actually shows it to them. What's the result? 18, the sons of Noah who came out of the ark were Shem, Cham, and Yafes. These 3 were the sons of Noah, and from these the whole world was spread out. Now they're willing to get to it. Now they're willing to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. But only after 4 stages. Only after 4 stages. And the key element here is, what is the 4th stage? The 4th stage is experiential. They see the rainbow. Somehow, seeing the rainbow is the capstone. When they see the rainbow, then they're ready to do it. Before that, not. And the question is, what does the rainbow contribute? What does see rainbow contribute to their motivation? And I will show you other passages which have this parallel idea. But let's go back through it again and see what do they have on board before they see the rainbow? And what could seeing the rainbow add to what they had on board? So it's before stage 1, they're not prepared to repopulate the world because they're afraid of a flood. God says, I give you a blessing and I give you a command. They say, but what for? I mean, it's a hopeless project. You did that once already. You told Adam and Chava to be fruitful and fill the earth. And they did, and look what it ended up. So we're not prepared to do it. Stage 2, Hashem tells them that I'm making a promise that there's not going to be any more general destruction. Now, do they believe it or don't they believe it? Let's see. Let's put that on the table and just keep it constant. Well, let's imagine they don't believe it. So then it says, I'm creating a sign in the sky of my commitment. Okay, if I don't trust what you say, why would your creating a light show in the sky convince me to trust you? What has the light show got to do with trusting you? Whatever reason I would have for doubting your word, the light show in the sky isn't going to change that. Then comes the fourth stage where he shows them the light show in the sky. Well, is that going to convince them? Why should it? Whatever doubts they have, maybe the failures were even greater than the previous failures. Who knows? But then creating a light show in the sky doesn't take away that doubt. And the fourth stage is seeing it. How could seeing it be the capstone? And yet what we see here is that seeing it is very important. That is what leads them to decide to repopulate the world. So the idea that the text is teaching is that experience is very important. Even when your mind is okay, experience can be very important. And even if your mind is certain, maybe in order to get you to act, you need experience in addition to what's going on in your mind. Because the experience here can't convince them, so it means that it would be necessary even if they're already convinced. That's not the difference that it's making. It's making a difference that's necessary even if they're convinced. Now this is case one. Now I want to show you two more cases where this takes place. One in last week's Parsha. Take a look at page 67. This is after the war of the 4 kings and the 5 kings. Top of the page, chapter 15. After these events, the word of Hashem came to Avram in a vision, saying, "Fear not, Avram, I'm a shield for you. Your reward is very great." After all, he just fought a war, and he was miraculously aided in defeating the 4 kings, and now maybe that used up his merit. No, don't worry. The reward that's waiting for you is very great. Avram says, "My Lord Hashem Elohim, what can you give me, seeing I am childless, and the person in charge of my house is this Eliezer?" Avram says, "See, you've given me no offspring. My steward Eliezer is going to inherit me." Suddenly the word of Hashem came to him and said, saying, "That one will not inherit you. Only he that shall come forth from within you shall inherit you. You will have your own natural children. This one will not be the one to carry on with what you have to give to the world." Now, God took him outside and said, "Gaze now toward the heavens and count the stars, if you're able to count them." And he said to him, "So shall your offspring be." And he trusted in Hashem and reckoned it in his righteousness. So, Avram saying, "You're promising me great reward. I have no children." Hashem says to him, "That's only temporary. Don't worry. You're going to have children." And how does he tell it to him? He takes him outside. Apparently he was in a tent. It was nighttime. He says, "Look at the stars. Try to count them." And by the way, there's a pause there. God spoke again. And one of the commentators says, Abraham obeys the order. Try to count them. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And Hashem says to him, "You see that that's hopeless? You see that's hopeless? Well, so shall your children be." Now let's ask the same question we asked before. God is promising him children. Does Abraham trust God's promise or not? If he doesn't trust God's promise, will looking at the stars and trying to count them convince him to trust God's promise? It has nothing to do with it. The stars are there tonight. They were there last night. They're going to be there tomorrow night. The same stars you always see. I'm looking at the stars. Oh, look at the stars. Yeah, now I trust you. It's ridiculous. If he had any reason to doubt what God promised him, looking at the stars wouldn't help. So what is looking at the stars supposed to accomplish in the context of God's promising him that he's going to have children? What role does it play? That's a second case. Now I'll tell you a third case, and this is where the Ramban explains the basic idea. This is in the book of Exodus, where Moses is standing at the burning bush. Look at page 307. As I read this to you, have your thinking cap on. There is a fundamental problem with what I'm reading to you. Just a problem in pshat, in the scenario. This is a scenario like in a story. There's something in the story that doesn't fit together. Beginning of chapter 4. This is the middle of a long dialogue between God and Moses. And in the middle of the dialogue, Moses responds and said, they will not believe me when I tell the Jewish people that their God, the God of the world, appeared to me. They will not believe me, will not heed my voice. They will say, Hashem did not appear to you. They're not going to trust me. Hashem says to him, what is that in your hand? He said, a staff. He said, cast it on the ground. He cast it on the ground, became a snake. Moses fled from it. Hashem said to Moses, stretch out your hand and grasp its tail. He stretched out his hand and grasped it tightly, and it became a staff in his palm. So that they shall believe that Hashem, the God of their forefathers, appeared to you. God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. Hashem said further to him, bring your hand into your bosom. He puts it inside his garment. He brought his hand into his bosom. He withdrew it, and behold, his hand was leprous, like snow. He said, return your hand to your bosom. Put it back in, and he took it out, and behold, it reverted to be like flesh. It shall be that if they do not believe you and do not heed the voice of the first sign, maybe you're afraid that when you throw down the staff, it becomes a snake, and then you pick it up, it becomes a staff again, they won't listen. Well, I'm giving you another sign. They'll believe the voice of the latter sign. And it shall be if they do not believe even these two signs, and do not heed your voice, then you shall take from the water of the river, pour it out on the dry land, and the water you shall take from the river will become blood when it is on the dry land. There we are. Now you're set, Moshe. You shouldn't have any worries about what they're going to say when you get there, because you're set. You'll be okay. You see something in the scenario here which doesn't quite fit. Now, I'm asking the question to you. I didn't see it until I read the Ramban. Not expecting you to see it, but maybe you'll see it. There's something extra here, something that's unnecessary, something that's just too much. Let me structure it for you again and see if you can get it. If not, I'll explain it to you. What's Moses' problem? He's sitting there in Midian, and wherever he is, in the Chorev, and God is saying to him, go down to Egypt. Let's say it takes 4 weeks to get to Egypt. So, go down to Egypt. And Moses says, let's see, I'm going down to Egypt. 4 weeks from now, when I'm in Egypt, I'm going to have a problem. Because I'll tell them that the ancient God of the Jews appeared to me, they won't believe me. So, God says to him, I'll solve your problem for you. I'll show you that, in fact, I'll explain to you why they will believe to you. Because in front of them, 4 weeks from now, you throw the staff on the ground, and it'll become a snake. 4 weeks from now, in front of them, you put your hand in your garment, it'll become leprous. And if that doesn't work, you take water from the Nile, and you can pour it on the ground and become blood. That's not quite what the Torah says, does it? Is it? What else does the Torah put in extra above and beyond what I just said?
Moses completes all of those miracles now as well.
Yeah. I just said the way it would be logical to do it. You're worried what will happen 4 weeks from now. Tell him what will happen 4 weeks from now. When you get there, you'll throw down your staff and it'll become a snake. When you get there, you'll put your hand in your garment, it'll become leprous. That's not what happens. God does that for Moses here, now, 4 weeks before, when he's all by himself in the desert. Why does he do that? Why doesn't he just tell him, just a second, why does he just tell him that that's what's going to happen? And indeed, that's what he does with the third sign, doesn't he? The third sign, he says, if they don't believe the first two, then when you get there, take water from the river and make it into blood. He doesn't arrange that there should be a spring of water here in front of Moses and say, pick up the water and pour it out, see it becomes blood. Doesn't do that. Only 2 out of 3. That's a Jewish question. You have a scenario, you have a problem, you're solving the problem, and there's extra stuff there that isn't used in solving the problem. What's it there for? So the Ramban makes two, wonderful remarks. First of all, he says there's a rabbinical tradition. Maybe you'll learn about it when we get to the book of Exodus. A rabbinical tradition that the first two were punishments to Moses because he slandered the Jewish people. He said they wouldn't believe. God says to him, just the snake is the symbol of lashon hara and slander, and that's why he's created a snake. And leprosy is the punishment for speaking lashon hara. So those things, two things are done to Moses to punish him now for the way he spoke about the Jewish people. You see that the rabbinic tradition is aware of the problem. Why is it being done now? Says it's being, isn't this amazing? It says it's advertised as the solution that's going to be used a month from now. Why do it now? And the rabbinic tradition says he was being punished for his slandering. And the third, that was enough. The third one had nothing to do with the slander. That's why it doesn't have to be done now. That's one way to approach it. The Ramban brings the Chazal, and then he says, in addition, I want to explain it as follows. Notice I said in addition. There's not a disagreement here. In addition, I want to explain it as follows. In order for Moses' heart to be confident in his mission, he needs to see the first two miracles. Moses has no intellectual doubts. God is speaking to him directly. Not as if, what odds would you give on it's happening when you get there? 60%, 80%, I don't know. No, he has no intellectual doubts, but there's a big difference between being intellectually convinced of something and your heart being confident. Much of the Muslim movement is based on this very idea. So, he says, in order for him to feel confident about his mission, he needs to experience these two miracles. Not just to know intellectually that they will take place, but to experience these two miracles. I'll give you an example of this, pirated from David Hume. Let's imagine that there's a place that makes metal cages, 6-sided metal cages to hold animals in or people in, whatever you want, right? And let's say that you've been there and to the factory and you've even tested them. You climbed in one, and then it was lifted off the ground, and you jump up and down, and then you know it's solid, perfectly all right. Okay. Now, the last experience is they put you in the metal cage and they drive you over to a cliff, and then there's a boom that leads out over the cliff and lets it down a little bit, and you're hanging over a cliff. And you look down, it's the Grand Canyon. Are you perfectly calm? Perfectly? Do you have doubts? Oh, what's the probability it'll slip? Maybe 1 in 5? No, you know it's steel, But when you look down, that's something else. My father, once went down the Grand Canyon on donkeys. He says a quarter of the animals hanging over the edge. And he kicks stones and they fall. And they keep falling until they finally reach the bottom. Now, he knows that it's been going on for decades and no one ever fell off and no donkey ever fell off. Still, when you're riding and shuffling back and forth and the stones are falling into space, you feel differently about it. So the fact that your mind tells you something doesn't mean that your heart will be in tune with what the mind tells you. And even here, it's even Moses, where God is speaking to him. Still, his heart won't be in tune unless he sees two of the miracles directly. So these are 3 places where we're being told that experience is a necessary teacher. It's a necessary teacher because a human being is more than just a brain, more than just seichel, logic, more than just judgment. A person has also an emotional side, and to be shalem, to be complete in a task, in a project, all parts of you have to be brought on board. And bringing the mind on board isn't enough to bring the heart on board. And requires a separate process. The whole Muslim movement is based on this principle. Yeah.
But then, so you're saying that Moses
now has his heart and mind with full confidence in God and in him carrying out this God's mission and getting Jewish people on board. But then why does Moses then say, please my Lord, I'm not a man of words, not since yesterday? And then it goes on. So like he's saying, really, this is not my duty. This is not.
It's an interesting question. Actually, I didn't put in the context of the whole discussion. In this whole discussion, Moses uses every possible objection against the project. This is an answer to this particular objection. They won't believe me. And when it's all over and he gets answers to all of his objections, Moses says, please send somebody else. And the result is, it says, God is angered against him. God is angered against him. And the oral tradition says that's when he lost being first the high priest. Because he should have been not only the king figure, but he should have been the high priest as well. So Moses is desperate to get out of this. Now you could ask why he's desperate to get out of it. And in fact, I don't know, this is an official commentary, but it's like a wry observation here. Moses, you raised every objection to God, and God answered all the objections. And you still say you don't want to go? So why did you go through the objections? Makes it sound like, well, there's this problem and this problem and this problem. Once the problems are solved, you'll go, and then you don't go. And the answer is, yeah, but I learned a lot by raising the problems. I got answers to the problem. I learned a lot. It was worth it. But I don't want to go anyway. At any rate, he paid for it. He paid for it, and he regretted it. To the end of his days, he regretted it. I have proofs for that, but I'm not going to go into them now. But that's the idea here. The idea here is that the mind can be convinced, and the emotions, the heart, can be not on board, and the experience can bring the heart on board. And what now really would have to be explained is, what is the mind and what is the heart, and how are they separate from one another, and what's the strategy for pulling them back together? Yeah, your question.
Why does Moshe require two tests? Not like, the staff becoming a snake one, and then putting his hand into his shirt too. Why doesn't one enough? Why does he need two?
It's a good question, and I have no clue. The Ramban does not explain that. I don't know.
I mean, the Nachash, it was just a staff. It wasn't any physical harm towards him, but the leprosy was like towards him. But if
you see, this is right. There are other things that are being communicated by these two events. But he's asking a simpler question. If the whole point of it is to strengthen his heart, why didn't Moses say after the staff, okay, fine, got it? So in other words, and I don't know the answer to that question, and the Ramban doesn't address it. It's a good question. Maybe the other commentators address it because it's a fundamental question. Okay, so now let's go back and see if we can apply this to the first two cases. They're trying to Noach and his children and the wives were told to repopulate the earth. Now, what does see the bow? What kind of experience is that? And here, just like in English, B-O-W is used for the instrument with which you shoot arrows, and also for the colors in the sky. And there's a very beautiful symbolism here. If I'm holding a bow and I'm going to shoot arrows, the structure is there's a curved piece of wood, and then there's a string. I hold the wood, I pull the string, and then I shoot the arrow. The curvature of the wood is towards me. The curvature of the wood is towards the shooter.
yeah,
Therefore, in ancient times, some places, a sign of peace was to take your bow and turn it around so the curvature faces the other guy. That way you can't shoot. That's a sign of peaceful intentions, where you turn the bow around and the curvature faces the other guy.
so the bow's facing Hashem.
Okay, so now, this bow that we see in the sky, which way does the curvature face? Does it face Hashem? Does it face us?
Hashem.
The curve faces us.
Yeah, so it's like we're shooting at Hashem.
Well, no, it's in the heavens, right? It's his bow.
So it's
His bow turned around, so it's not facing him, so he's not shooting at us.
Oh, that's insane.
That is insane. That is insane. So you look at that and you think, wow, this is Hashem saying peace.
Hashem has a bow in it.
Now, I'm not saying he really has a bow and he really
No,
shoots.
but-
It's a symbol. It's just a
It's
symbol.
crazy.
But as a symbol, it's Hashem showing you a picture of peace. That's what. So now, that's one. What about Abraham with the stars? Here, there's something in that passage which I didn't tell you. Rashi explains it. Hashem says to Abraham, look at the stars. The word that he uses is habet. Lahabit in Hebrew means to look down at something. Now let's see. Usually, when you're out at night, you look at the stars, you look up, right? I mean, you don't look down. Look up. So Rashi says, bringing a midrash, Shem took him higher than the stars. Took him higher than the stars. One implication of this is the stars do have some effect on earthly affairs. And Abraham's future, as far as the stars are concerned, is childlessness. What Hashem is saying to him is, but you're not bound by the stars. You're not bound by the stars. That is to say, you can climb above them. Not that the stars aren't relevant to you, that's a mistake, but you can climb above them. And I'm telling you that that's what's going to happen. So he's packing a lot into the experience. It's an experience of how it is that it's going to happen. Now, again, if Abraham had doubts in trusting God, he promised me, but maybe it won't happen. So then, having an experience of how it will happen wouldn't help him because the same doubts would apply to the experience. That's the experience you gave me, but who knows if it'll come true. So it's not that. It's that intellectually I believe what Hashem is telling me, but my heart is in confusion. My heart is not confident of what that's going to do. And that being the case, Hashem gives him an experience so that his heart will be confident. Now, this is something which Hashem does for people and for groups at times, and there's a great lesson for us here. The lesson is, don't count on just intellectual learning to reform your attitudes and reform your perspective and your actions, because people aren't built that way. People act against what they know is correct lots of the time. Your students, I doubt this has ever happened to you, but you certainly know people who don't study for the exam until the night before. And then they get all the nicotine pills, adrenaline pills, and they drink a lot of coffee and they stay up all night, and then they're sleepy during the exam and they get a lousy grade, and they say, oh, I learned my lesson. Next exam period, I'm going to start studying 2 weeks before. And either they do or they don't. They know that they're harming themselves. They know they're going to be worse off. Still, sometimes they do it. So people can be convinced without any question that what they're doing is self-injurious now, right away. I'm not talking about the world to come and spiritual things and so forth and so on. It's against their own interests, and they still don't do it. So there's a gap between the head and the heart, and that means that in improving yourself and in changing direction, there are really two different strategies that have to be used. First of all, you got to learn things so you know what's true. But in addition to that, you have to work separately on bringing your emotions and your behavior into line with what you know is true. And for that, experience is a great and necessary teacher. One experience that is very useful is to be in the presence of people who have this together. They really have it together. When you see the way they behave, you see what they do, see the sacrifices they make, you see their honesty, it's very inspiring to enable you to bring your feelings and your behavior into line. I'll just give you 2 examples from my experience. I was very privileged to be together with the Boston Rabbi, my Rabbi Zatzal, for 47 years. 47 years. And I'll tell you two stories about him. And reading his biographies can help for this as well. When he did a mitzvah, like Friday night, we make Kiddush Friday night. We, those who were close to him, felt that this is the last Kiddush. Not because he's going to die, God forbid, not because of anything morbid, but this Friday night Kiddush will never come back. You have only one chance. Next week will be another one. It'll be a different Kiddush, on a different date. But this one's never coming back. So do it right. Do it right. It's precious. On Sukkot, when we finished the 7 days of using the Lulav and Esrog, and he kissed them goodbye. And he kissed the sukkah goodbye. He kissed all the walls, and he climbed up on a ladder. He kissed the schach. It was, and he didn't make any gestures and sing any songs. It was just saying goodbye to something he loves, and you could see that. So he was that kind of person. It wasn't demonstrative. It wasn't extravagant. It was just emotion. And then I'll tell you that my first wife was a social worker. Social workers have strains. They deal with people who have different problems, different needs, and some of them are suffering, and it's hard. So she spoke to the Rabbi. Of course, he had hundreds of people who came to him with problems, and she asked him, how do you deal with it? How do you preserve your own emotional equilibrium and not get so wrapped up in it that you become emotionally crippled? And he said to her, look, it is difficult. I agree with you. And it's something you have to learn. And through experience, through time, it's a skill that you acquire and develop. That's what he told her. The next morning, he called her up at 7 a.m. He said, I don't know why I told you that. It's not true at all. I was up all night. And it was something which, was tearing me apart. Now, here's a great man with hundreds of followers, a great scholar from a great distinguished family. He spent his childhood in Yerushalayim when he was 12, 13 years of age by himself. His parents weren't there. He lived indirectly through the tragedy of the Holocaust. He's a very, very significant man. And he told her something, and he felt that that he had been misrepresenting himself and misrepresenting the ideas. And he called her up and said, I've got to tell you that what I said isn't true. You meet someone like that whose care for truth, who had no element whatsoever of honor and respect and dignity and all the rest, who cared for people and who was extraordinary in many different ways. You are privileged to associate with somebody like that. It has an effect on your emotions. And you can do this with biographies. And there are two sorts of biographies. There are biographies of great people, which is definitely worthwhile doing. And then there are biographies of so-called ordinary people, people who didn't have special parents and didn't go to special yeshivas and weren't great scholars, and the extraordinary lives that they lived, which in a way is more relevant to you because you say, well, if he, coming from his background, did this, maybe I could do more than I'm doing. A wonderful example of this is Lieutenant Birnbaum, boy from Brooklyn who ended up in the United States Army, and what he did there and how he kept mitzvos and so forth and so on. There's a book about some Beis Yaakov girls who lived during the Holocaust called To Vanquish the Dragon. These are books that show you extraordinary elements of character and of spirituality, which then can be a basis for what you can read about what happened to the captives now and the families of the captives, what they did during the 2 years that they were captives, and how they never gave up hope, and they went to great people to help them, and the people went out of the way to help them. These are things which are really helpful to bring the heart into line with the brain, and that way you can achieve some kind of shleimus. So that's what I'm saying, that this is an idea that experience is a great teacher to affect those parts of your character which are separate from your brain. And although there are certain strands of traditional Jewish practice which stress the intellect very heavily, I think I would say the vast majority recognize that there's a gap between the intellect and the emotions, and that separate work has to be done on the emotions to bring them in line with the intellect. That's the principle. Yeah.
Far as Hashem directly has making it clear to us that He wants us to change our emotions. How does someone on his own change his emotions?
So there are practices which can help to do this. I'll give you just 2 examples which they had in the Mussar Yeshiva, so maybe 3, which illustrate this. Let's say the person is suffering from pride; he's overly proud. So they would tell him, go into the bakery and stand online, and when your turn comes, say, "I'd like to order a pound of nails."
Nails?
Yeah, in the bakery. What's going to happen? Are you nuts? Nails? What are you doing in here? And then people start to laugh, and then you walk out maybe a little less proud, a little less, right? Or person's afraid he's afraid of danger. Go into the hospital and help patients who may have, especially those days, they didn't know which diseases were infectious or weren't infectious, right? Go to the hospital and help people who are in the hospital, in spite of the fact that you're taking a chance. Yeah, it's like phobias. Right? Coping with phobias means you gradually experience the phobia to the point where you become immune to the phobia. There are ways to change your emotion. That's the way of changing the emotion of fear. Right? So there are ways of doing this. You can look at the Mussar literature. Say with me.